the duty of all elected officials to uphold their oath of office, to fulfill that oath by upholding the Constitution and following the letter of the law. The most important law enforcement that we have is law enforcement on the people that are the public officials. And that's why the founders were so careful in how they worded things and what they set up. And what they set up for America is a federal union of republics, 13 sovereign states, and states mean governments. Well, okay, they came together to secede from the British Empire. They acceded to the Confederation in the Articles of Confederation. The 13 as a confederation, which they formed in the Second Continental Congress, then fought their revolutionary secession against the British Empire. When the king sued for peace, and at the Treaty of Paris, the King of England signed the peace treaty. He named specifically all 13 of the states. Each of the 13 signed that. Those 13 remained in the Confederation until several years later, about 8 years later, when they then seceded from that Confederation. They then acceded to the Constitutional Federal Union. Among the conditions for them to join that union upon leaving the Confederation was that the states retained the duty, the authority, and the responsibility to protect the people. The people of the states formed that federal union. They did it through individual state ratifying conventions. The sheriff mentioned the preamble of the Bill of Rights, which is critically important. The preamble, along with the Supremacy Clause, along with the 9th and 10th Amendments, along with all of the discussions that took place in the Federalist Papers, which were a response to the Anti-Federalist Papers from the Jeffersonians and Patrick Henry and George Mason, who were very concerned that we were going to be leaving this Confederation for a consolidated national government. They did not want that. The Federalist Papers said, and Madison and others wrote, and Hamilton, and I think John Jay was another one, and all of them, they said, oh, it's going to be a federal government. We all understand that. They agreed in the ratification to several very important concepts that today are often forgotten, but they must be remembered historically, philosophically, and morally. That the people are sovereign because we are made, the sheriff was talking about how important God is. For people of faith, you can look at the scriptures, and it says that God made us in his image. As Judge Napolitano says, he is free, therefore we are made free. Others who may not share that faith will say, well, as a condition of our humanity, we are free naturally. And we have the right to delegate some of our sovereignty to local or state government. That is what they did. Those local and the state governments came together as the agents of the people, or the states came together as the agents of the people. Really, they're delegates to the Constitutional Convention. And then through the ratifying processes, which each of the 13 states did individually, to agree to that compact between the states. The states are the party to the agreement, which sets the rules on the feds. The feds are not a party to it. No federal employees, including black-robed magicians, were given the right to determine what the feds' powers are. They wouldn't have done that. That wouldn't have made any sense to have done it that way. They did not do it that way. The Supreme Court can issue all the opinions they want. They are not the final arbiters. And you can read, in fact, Mary just posted this on Facebook. I don't remember the exact quote, but Jefferson talked about that. Madison talked about it. Hamilton talked about it. This was the agreement. Not only did they say that the states had the right and the authority and the responsibility and the duty to protect the people's rights, they also said they had the right, the people had the right, to do what they did in 1776, to take their consent, to withdraw that consent, to leave the Union. Jefferson even said on his first inaugural in 1801, if a state wants to leave the Union, then I wish them well, we'll be friends, and that's exactly what they'd all agreed on. They only ratified the Constitution under that condition. And 3 states specifically mentioned it. Virginia, Rhode Island, and New York, 2 of which, of course, were northern states. But what if they wanted to stay in the Union? But there was something they objected to. Just as when they were in the British Empire, there were a number of fights they had where they said, well, we recognize the king and the parliament, but we have traditional rights as British Americans. When they were being violated, what did they do? They fought against those individual things. And so in 1798, when President Adams, the second president in the Constitutional Federal Union, 8 years after the ratification, took away, or attempted to take away, the right to free speech, a right which is granted by God, or just as part of our humanity, which we have naturally, a right which governments are formed to protect. When he tried to take that away, Thomas Jefferson wrote the Kentucky Resolves, and he said that when there was a usurpation, when the general government takes away the rights of the people and takes powers that were not delegated to it, a nullification of the act is the rightful remedy. And he said it is the moderate middle ground between submitting to that tyranny, submitting to that usurpation, and leaving the group and risking a violent confrontation. James Madison went to Virginia and wrote the Virginia Resolution, the Virginia Resolves of 1798. Apparently they kept it kind of quiet as to who wrote it for a while, but 10 years later it came out it was indeed Madison. And he said the states are duty-bound, not an option, duty-bound, to interpose on behalf of the people against federal usurpation in order to arrest the progress of the evil.
Well, we won't get that help from the nerd.
Well, no, we won't. But that's a great point. The great Mary McMaster, as always, cuts to the bottom line. So, what is our duty? What is his duty? His duty is to fulfill his oath of office, to uphold the Constitution. It's our duty to hold him accountable for that. That's what the sheriff pointed out. When the elected officials, whether it's Governor Snyder or legislators or congressional people or county and municipal officials, each of whom put their right hand on the Bible and take that oath of office, it is our duty to make sure that they follow their duty and uphold the Constitution.
Because what is that oath? It's a contract.
It's a contract.
You're supposed to stay within the four corners and the boundaries of that contract.
Yes, ma'am. And it is, as Mary likes to say, a sacred agreement they make too. Okay, so here's the point now. Something that's very important, and Sheriff Raines was alluding to some of these things that are happening, and the way that our rights are being violated, and we are at great risk, and in some cases, in many cases, actual damage has been done. But one piece of legislation that got through Washington and has been actually declared unconstitutional by a federal judge, even though we don't have to rely on them, but there was a judge, the great Judge Catherine Forrest, who was an Obama appointee, pointed out that sections 1021 and 1022 of the 2012 NDAA are unconstitutional. They were attempting to take away our rights to due process, just as the federal government did in the 1850s. In one of the worst laws ever written, a series of them, the Fugitive Slave Acts, they took away the right to due process of Americans of African descent. They said you could have bounty hunters come up here into Michigan and Wisconsin and other northern states and kidnap these people, put them back into bondage, and in some cases they actually were freedmen or people who were never slaves. No one should have ever been a slave. Slavery is abhorrent, totally immoral. It's, as Lysander Spooner said, it was unconstitutional, and yet that's what they were doing. The Congress voted for it, the President signed it, and the Supreme Court offered their opinion. It was law. It was not law. It is not the law of the land, because the Supremacy Clause says only the Constitution and laws made in pursuance thereof are the law of the land. The Ninth Amendment says just because the Constitution mentions certain things that might be our rights doesn't mean what they don't mention aren't our rights. We have our rights independent of and pre-existing the establishment of the government that was allegedly formed to protect those rights and protect that liberty. The 10th Amendment says those things which are not expressly delegated to the feds or prohibited by the Constitution to the states remain with the states or the people. And so in the 1850s, what happened? Northern states, every once in a while politicians do a good thing, not that often, but they did here, northern states, including Michigan, passed personal liberty laws. They nullified the Fugitive Slave Act. And in fact, Jefferson Davis in his farewell address complained about it, the state of South Carolina, when they seceded, which seceding was their right, but they had some wrong reasons for part of it, and one of those wrong reasons was they didn't like the nullification of the Fugitive Slave Act by all the northern states. They named them, including the great state of Michigan. Well, okay. Due process and the right to have a trial, a proper trial, by your peers before you're detained, and the right under posse comitatus, or the protection against the military arresting you, are all under assault from the 2012 NDAA and from the Patriot Act, the Fourth Amendment, everything, the NSA spying, all of it is wrong. Today, exciting news, in Albany, New York, the strongest protection against NDAA indefinite detention is taking place on a local level. In Albany, they have the Take Back Albany campaign. And they have a congressman, I believe, Councilman Anton Konev, who, along with almost half of the council there, are sponsoring this. We get one more sponsor. That gets us to, I think, the majority there. But there's a lot of work that's being done. The Panda Michigan team sent an endorsement of this. We'll see if we can get something from Campaign for Liberty as well to get over to the people in Albany to let them know this is important for Albany to defend the right to due process and the right to be free from indefinite detention without proper trial law. It's important for all of us in this federal union. They're leading the way first. We need to get the state of Michigan involved at the same time. Hopefully in Eaton County, in Oakland County, in Washtenaw, Wayne, Monroe, Livingston, all over this beautiful state, up north and out west and all that sort of thing. We need people at all municipal levels, at all counties to join together, and we need our governor and our state legislators to begin doing their duty to protect us. That's why they're there, not to take money from some people and give it to other people, not to be collaborationists with a Leviathan state on the banks of the Potomac, but to protect us against their usurpations.
Yay!
All right, so there's a lot of work to be done. We're going to be working on this diligently. All of you here and anybody watching the video, contact Michigan Campaign for Liberty, the Oakland County Campaign for Liberty, Michigan Panda. I think we may even get the Michigan 10th Amendment Center involved, because the 10th Amendment Center does a lot of great work on these things. In fact, the 10th Amendment Center, and we're going to hear from their leader here in Michigan, with whom I'm pleased to work, the great Shane Trail, has some wonderful videos talking about that fight against the Fugitive Slave Act and the story of Joshua Glover. And you can hear Mike Meharry, who's their communications director. If you're not moved by the way he talks about this and how the Underground Railroad was a form of personal nullification, then your heart does not beat as a human heart. So I say to you to watch those videos, let's all join together and do what we can. It's not a partisan fight. It's a fight of principle. It's a fight that we dare not lose.